The text came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I was not supposed to see it. Melissa's phone was on the kitchen counter, charging, face up, the way she always left it when she came by to drop something off, and forgot to take it with her into the other room. I was not looking for anything. I want to be honest about that, from the very first sentence of this story, because everything that follows depends on you believing that I did not go looking for trouble. Trouble came and sat down on my kitchen counter and lit itself up in blue and white letters while I was rinsing 2 coffee cups at the sink. The screen buzzed, then it buzzed again. And because it was sitting 3 feet from me, and because the kitchen was quiet enough that I could hear the vibration against the granite, I glanced over out of nothing more than habit. The same habit that made me glance at license plates, and glance at hands, and glance at the space under a stairwell for 31 years of my working life before I retired, and told myself I didn't need to notice things anymore. The name on the screen said Marcus. The message underneath it said, "Dad is gone by Friday. Judge Renfro owes me one. Don't say anything to him before then." I stood at my daughter's sink with a dish towel in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, and I read those 7 words 3 times. Because the first time you read something like that, your mind tries very hard to make it mean something smaller than it does. Dad is gone by Friday. I told myself it might mean a trip, a visit somewhere, some scheduling matter about a man named Dad who was not me, because surely my own daughter was not typing my name into a text message to her husband like I was a line item on somebody's calendar. Then I looked at the second half of the message. Judge Renfro owes me one. I know Judge Renfro. Not personally, not as a friend, but I know the name, the way you know. The name of a man who sat 2 offices down the hall from where you spent 3 decades of your working life inside institutions that most people never think about until they need them. Harold Renfro had been a county prosecutor before he was a judge, and I had worked cases that crossed his desk more than once. And I knew exactly what kind of debts a man like that could owe, and exactly what kind of favors a man like that could quietly deliver, if someone asked at the right angle, in the right room, with the right paperwork already sitting in front of him. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a federal investigator with the Office of Inspector General, the last 11 of those years running a unit that did nothing but chase down fraud inside charities and nonprofits that had learned to use sick children and grieving families as a business model. I retired 3 years ago, 4 months after my wife Eleanor died, because the 2 of us had a plan for retirement that involved a garden and a boat and a lot of quiet mornings, and once she was gone, I didn't have the heart to build a version of that plan that didn't include her. So I stopped. I let the badge go into a drawer. I let the skills go quiet, the way you let a muscle go quiet when you stop using it, telling yourself it will always be there if you need it again. I did not expect to need it again inside my own daughter's kitchen on a Tuesday night in October, reading a text message that used the word gone the way you'd use it about a piece of furniture. Somebody was planning to haul to the dump. I set the coffee cup down very carefully because my hands wanted to shake, and I had spent 31 years teaching myself not to let my hands do what they wanted to do in moments like this. I did not touch the phone. I did not pick it up, did not scroll, did not do anything that could ever be described later as me going through my daughter's private messages, because I already understood, standing there in that kitchen, that whatever this was, it was going to end up somewhere with rules and records and people who would ask exactly that question. I only read what was already lit up on the screen in front of me, unlocked, uninvited, the way you'd read a billboard somebody put up on the side of the highway. I heard Melissa's footsteps coming back down the hallway, and I picked the towel back up and went back to drying the cup in my hand like a man who had done nothing at all in the last 90 seconds, except stand at a sink. "Sorry," she said, coming into the kitchen and reaching past me for the phone. Caleb needed help finding his inhaler. She said it the way she said everything lately, quick and a little too smooth, a sentence that had been polished by repetition until it slid out without any friction at all. She glanced at the screen before she pocketed it, and something crossed her face for half a second, some small flicker I couldn't read, And then it was gone, and she was smiling at me the way she'd been smiling at me for months. The smile she used to use when she was 12 years old and had done something she needed me not to ask about. "You good to head out, Dad?" she said. "It's getting late." I told her I was good. I told her dinner was wonderful, which it had been, because Melissa had always been a better cook than her mother ever was, and I had never once told Eleanor that to her face. I hugged my daughter at the door the way I had hugged her 1,000 times, and I felt her arms around my shoulders, and I thought about the phrase "gone by Friday" sitting somewhere inside that embrace like a stone in a shoe, and I drove home in the dark with both hands steady on the wheel, and my mind running through 31 years of training that I had told myself I would never need again. I want to back up now, because you need to understand what I was already carrying before that text message landed, or none of what happened afterward is going to make the kind of sense it deserves to make. My grandson Caleb was 8 years old. He had my late wife's eyes, dark brown, the kind of eyes that seemed to hold more thought behind them than most children carry, and he had a laugh that used to come easy and often, the kind of laugh that made a room feel lighter just by being in it. He had been diagnosed 14 months earlier with a rare autoimmune disorder that Melissa and Marcus explained to me in careful, clinical language I had never quite been able to keep straight in my head, something involving his joints and his immune system and a treatment plan that required him to use a wheelchair for what they called flare periods, and a strict medication schedule, and regular visits to a specialist 2 hours away in a city I had never once been invited to accompany them to. Marcus had started a foundation. He called it the Caleb Hensley Cole Foundation for Pediatric Autoimmune Research, and he had built it, by his own account, because watching his son suffer had shown him how underfunded this particular disease was, how few families had access to the kind of specialized care Caleb needed, how many other children out there were fighting the same invisible battle without anyone to speak for them. It had a website with a soft blue color scheme and a photograph of Caleb in his wheelchair on the homepage, his small hands folded in his lap, his eyes aimed somewhere just past the camera, in a way that made your chest hurt to look at. I had donated to it myself. $3,000 from my pension in the first month, because what grandfather wouldn't? For 14 months I had watched my grandson get wheeled in and out of family gatherings, watched him grow quieter, watched him decline invitations to run in the backyard because Marcus would remind everyone, gently but firmly, that Caleb needed to conserve his energy. I had accepted every piece of it the way you accept things about people you love, without interrogation, because interrogating the people you love feels like a betrayal of the love itself. Then, on a Sunday afternoon in September, 5 weeks before that text message lit up on Melissa's counter, I saw something that I did not let myself examine closely enough at the time, because I did not want it to mean what some old, tired, well-trained part of my brain already suspected it meant. I had come by to sit with Caleb, while Melissa and Marcus went to a fundraising luncheon for the foundation. It was a warm afternoon, unusually warm for September, and I had wheeled Caleb out onto the back patio so he could get some sun, and then I had gone inside to get us both a glass of lemonade, and the kitchen window over the sink looks out at an angle that catches the whole width of that patio. If you're standing at the right spot. I was standing at the right spot. Caleb sat in that wheelchair for about a minute after I disappeared through the door. Then he looked left. Then he looked right. Then he stood up, easily, the way any healthy 8-year-old stands up when he thinks no one is watching, and he walked to the edge of the patio where a soccer ball had rolled under a hydrangea bush sometime that spring, and he picked it up, and he dribbled it twice against the side of his sneaker with the careless, unthinking coordination of a boy who has never once had to consider whether his legs would hold him. And then he heard the ice machine cycle inside the kitchen, and he froze, and he looked at the window, and he saw me standing there with a lemonade pitcher in my hand. I did not react. I want you to understand that about me, because it matters for everything that comes later. 31 years of federal investigation teaches you exactly one thing above every other thing it teaches you, and it is this: the moment you react, you lose your advantage, and worse than that, You frighten the very person who might eventually tell you the truth if you give them enough room to find their own way to it. So I smiled at my grandson through the window. I held up the lemonade pitcher like I was showing off my progress. And Caleb, 8 years old, with something moving across his face that I recognized immediately because I had seen it 100 times in my career on the faces of children who had been taught, carefully and repeatedly, exactly how to perform a version of themselves that adults needed to see, climbed back into that wheelchair and folded his hands in his lap and waited for me to bring the lemonade out like nothing at all had happened. I did not say anything to him that day. I told myself I needed more information before I said anything to anyone. I told myself that a boy standing up and dribbling a soccer ball on a warm afternoon did not necessarily mean his illness was fabricated, that autoimmune conditions can fluctuate, that flare periods can lift without warning, that I was an old man who had spent too many years looking for fraud in every corner of every room, and maybe, just maybe, I was looking for it now in a place where it did not exist. I told myself all of that. And some part of me, the part that had put away my badge and tried to become a man who trusted his family without conditions, wanted very badly to believe it. But I am my late wife's husband, and Eleanor used to say that I had never once in 40 years of marriage successfully lied to myself about anything that mattered. And she was right, because 3 days later I called an old colleague named Reggie Okafor, who had spent 22 years as a pediatric rheumatologist before he retired to a small practice outside the city, and who had testified as an expert witness for me twice in cases involving Munchausen by proxy fraud back when I was still working full-time. I told him I needed a favor, and I needed it kept quiet, and I needed him to look at a child and tell me what he actually saw, not what anyone had told him to see. He had room for us the following Tuesday. I told Melissa I wanted to take Caleb to get an ice cream and run a small errand. Something about picking up a gift for a friend's grandchild, a story so thin I am almost ashamed of how easily she accepted it. She said yes without a second of hesitation, which told me something too, though I did not let myself weigh it fully at the time. A mother whose child was genuinely fighting a rare autoimmune disease should have asked more questions about an unplanned outing on a school day. She asked none. Dr. Okafor's office was quiet and unremarkable from the outside, the kind of place chosen specifically by people who understand that serious work does not require an impressive lobby. He shook Caleb's hand first, the way good pediatricians do, and I watched my grandson's shoulders straighten slightly at being treated like a person instead of a diagnosis. The examination took 40 minutes. Reflexes, joints, range of motion, blood work drawn with a practiced gentleness that barely gave Caleb flinch. Through all of it, my grandson sat on that table with his hands folded, answering in short, careful sentences, performing again, though I could see the performance fraying at the edges the longer it went on. The way a lie frays when the person telling it is exhausted and young and has been carrying it for longer than any child should have to carry anything. When Caleb was sent to the waiting room with a juice box, Dr. Okafor closed the door and looked at me over the top of his glasses with an expression I recognized from 20 years of working alongside people who dealt in hard truths for a living. "Walter," he said, "this child has full, unrestricted range of motion in every joint I tested. His reflexes are textbook normal. There is no inflammation, no swelling, no muscular atrophy consistent with 14 months of reduced mobility. I don't need the blood work to tell you what I already know by looking at him. This boy is not sick. He has never been sick, not with anything close to what's been described to me." I sat in that small examination room with my hands pressed flat on my knees, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I had not felt crack open since the week Eleanor died, a specific hollowing kind of grief, except this one had rage folded into it, rage at my son-in-law, rage at my daughter, rage that would take weeks to fully understand the shape of, because underneath the anger about Caleb was something even worse waiting to surface, something involving money and lies and thousands of strangers who had opened their wallets for a boy who had never been sick a day in his life. "I need a formal report," I told him. "Signed, sealed, ready to hold up anywhere it needs to hold up." "You'll have it by Friday," he said. I did not know yet, sitting in that office, how much that particular word, Friday, was going to end up meaning to both sides of what was coming. I only knew that I had just found the first thread of something much larger than a grandfather's private worry, and that pulling it was going to cost me things I was not yet ready to name. I drove Caleb home in silence, mostly, though at one point, somewhere on the highway, he said quietly from the back seat, not looking at me, "You're not going to tell them, are you?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Tell them what, buddy?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Nothing. Never mind." I let it go because pushing an 8-year-old in a moving car toward a confession he wasn't ready to give is not something I was willing to do, not to him, not after what I'd just watched him carry into that examination room and out of it again. But I filed the moment away, the way I had filed away thousands of small moments over 31 years, because in my experience, the moments a person tries hardest to wave off are almost always the ones worth remembering exactly. That was 5 weeks before the text message. 5 weeks in which I quietly, carefully, without raising a single flag, began doing the only thing I have ever really known how to do well. I started pulling threads. The Caleb Hensley Cole Foundation for Pediatric Autoimmune Research was registered as a 501c3 nonprofit in this state, which meant it was legally required to file an annual public disclosure, a Form 990, available to any citizen who cared to look for it. I pulled the 2 filings that existed. The numbers on the surface looked plausible enough to fool almost anyone. Revenue from donations, just over $510,000 across 2 years. Program expenses, described as covering specialized treatment, travel to out-of-state specialists, experimental therapies not covered by insurance, $380,000 of that total. I called a man named Otis Bramwell, a retired hospital billing administrator I had worked with on 2 cases back in the early 2000s, a man with the particular gift of reading institutional paperwork the way most people read the morning paper, quickly and with total retention. I gave him the names of the 3 specialty clinics listed in the Foundation's filings as recipients of Caleb's treatment funds. He called back in 2 days. "Walter," he said, and his voice had none of its usual dry humor in it. "One of these clinics doesn't exist. Not anywhere in this state, not under this name, not under any name close to it. The second one exists, but they have no record of ever treating a patient named Caleb Cole or Caleb Hensley Cole. The third one is real, and they did see a patient by that name, twice, for what their own intake notes describe as a routine wellness consultation. 2 visits, total billed amount, according to their own records, $412, and the Foundation reported spending how much through that clinic? $140,000, Otis said, across 18 months. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the gap between those 2 numbers laid out in front of me like something with its own weight and its own smell, and I understood, with the particular cold clarity that had once made me very good at my job and had cost me, over the years, more sleep than I will ever get back, that I was not looking at a grieving family stretching the truth to make ends meet during a hard time. I was looking at a structure. Somebody had built this. Somebody had understood from the very beginning exactly how much a sick child's face was worth to strangers on the internet, and had built a machine specifically designed to extract that value. I thought about the attorney of record on the Foundation's incorporation documents. I already knew, before I pulled the paperwork, whose signature I was going to find on that line, in the same confident, forward-leaning hand I had watched sign birthday cards and graduation gifts for 29 years. Marcus. My son-in-law had not stumbled into this because his son got sick. He had built the entire architecture of it. Quietly, patiently, the way I had spent my career learning to recognize when other men built exactly this kind of thing. And somewhere in the process, he had decided that his own son's body was simply raw material, the most valuable asset the family had, and he had spent it. I want to tell you that I moved quickly after that. I did not. I moved the way I had been trained to move, which is to say carefully, methodically, gathering every piece of ground before I put my full weight on it, because I understood something that most people in this kind of situation never fully understand until it is too late for them. The moment you accuse a man like Marcus of something like this without an airtight case behind you, he does not fold, he counterattacks. And a 64-year-old retired grandfather with a private suspicion and no documentation stands no chance whatsoever against a corporate attorney with resources, connections, and a judge who apparently already owed him a favor. So I built my case in silence through the month of September and into October. I photographed everything I could photograph without ever removing a single physical document from anyone's home. I copied public filings. I built a spreadsheet by hand, on paper, the old way, because paper does not sync to a cloud account someone else can access. I found 4 other children listed on the Foundation's donor materials over its 2-year history, each with a story, each with a fundraising campaign, and I began, carefully, quietly, the work of finding out whether those children were real, whether those illnesses were real, whether the money raised in their names had gone anywhere near an actual hospital. And in the last week of September, I did the one thing that would matter more than anything else I did in this entire story. I picked up the phone and called the State Attorney General's Charitable Trusts and Solicitations Division, and I asked to speak to a woman named Deputy Director Priya Anand, whom I had worked alongside on 3 separate cases during the last 6 years of my career, a woman who had taken over responsibilities I once held and who understood, without me needing to explain it twice, exactly what kind of weight was sitting behind a call like mine. "Priya," I said, "I need to open a channel. Nothing on the record yet. Just a preliminary inquiry. Quiet, careful. How serious?" "Walter? Serious enough that I'm calling you instead of waiting until I have absolute proof," I said. "Which tells you something about how serious I think it already is." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the words that gave me the single most important piece of protection I would carry into everything that followed. "Send me what you have. I'll open a file. If this turns into something formal, I want a paper trail showing exactly when this office first became aware, and I want it to start today, not the day you decide you're finally ready." I sent her 4 pages that night. Careful, hedged, exactly as much as I could prove, and not one word more. That channel had been open for 3.5 weeks by the time I stood at Melissa's kitchen counter, reading a text message that told me my own daughter and her husband were planning, by Friday, to make me disappear from my grandson's life before I ever got the chance to say a single word about what I already knew. I understood, standing there with a dish towel in my hand, that the clock they thought they were setting for me had actually been running against them for almost a month. They believed they were about to move first. They had no idea they were about to walk directly into ground I had already prepared. I drove home that night, and I did not sleep, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and Eleanor's old pocket watch in my hand, the one she'd given me on our 20th anniversary, the one I still wound every Sunday out of habit, even though I had nowhere in particular to be on time for anymore, I made a decision about exactly how the rest of this week was going to go. They wanted me gone by Friday. I decided Friday was exactly when I was going to walk in. The days between that Tuesday night and the following Friday moved the way important days always move when you are the only person who understands what is actually happening inside them. Too slowly and too fast at the same time. Stretched thin with waiting, and then suddenly terrifyingly short. On Wednesday morning, I called Priya Anand again. "I need everything moved up," I told her. "There's a deadline now. Friday. I believe they intend to file for an emergency protective order against me, or possibly pursue a guardianship action, claiming I'm unfit to be around my grandson, and I have reason to believe a sitting judge has agreed to expedite it as a personal favor." There was a silence on the line long enough that I could hear her typing. "Which judge?" she said, and it was not really a question. "Harold Renfro." Another silence, shorter this time, but heavier. "I know that name," she said carefully. "There have been 2 complaints filed against him in the last 18 months regarding expedited rulings that favored parties with existing relationships to his campaign donors. Neither complaint went anywhere formally, but they're on file. Walter, if what you're describing is accurate, this isn't just a fraud case anymore. This is potential judicial misconduct sitting directly on top of it." "I know," I said. That's why I need this handled the right way, not fast and sloppy. Fast and clean. Give me 48 hours, she said. I'm going to bring in the Judicial Conduct Commission on a parallel track, quietly, so that if Renfro tries to move anything through his courtroom Friday, there's already an independent body watching exactly how he does it. I want to pause here and tell you something about the particular kind of fear I was carrying that week, because it was not the kind of fear people usually imagine when they picture an old man squaring off against his own family. I was not afraid of Marcus. I was not even, in the end, afraid of what a corrupt judge might try to do inside a courtroom, because I had spent 3 decades learning exactly how much protection exists inside the machinery of the law for a person patient enough to use it correctly. What I was afraid of every single hour of those 3 days was Caleb. I was afraid of what would happen to an 8-year-old boy who had spent 14 months being taught, deliberately and repeatedly, that his body was a performance and his illness was a script, if the adults around him suddenly discovered all at once, in public, in a courtroom, exactly what had been done to him. I did not want my grandson's unmasking to happen the way it had almost happened on that patio in September, through a window, by accident, with no one there to catch him. I wanted, if I could possibly manage it, for the truth to come out in a way that protected him even while it destroyed everything his parents had built. So on Thursday afternoon, I did something that violated every careful procedural instinct I had spent 3 decades cultivating. I called Melissa and asked if I could take Caleb to the park. He's got a bit of a flare today, she said, the automatic response smooth as a stone worn round by water. He's pretty tired. We'll just sit on a bench, I said. I miss him. Mel, please. Something in my voice must have carried more than I intended because she paused, and for just a moment I heard something underneath her usual polish, something almost like guilt, though I would spend a long time afterward wondering whether I imagined it. Okay, she said. Pick him up at 2. Back by 4. He needs his afternoon medication at 4:30. I did not ask what the medication was. I already had a strong guess, and I did not want to give away, even by the smallest inflection in my voice, how much I already knew. I picked Caleb up at 2. He came out to the car in his wheelchair, folded and loaded into the trunk with the same practiced efficiency I had watched for 14 months, and we drove to Ridgeline Park, a quiet green space about 10 minutes from his house, far enough that no one would overhear us, close enough that I could have him home well before 4:30. We found a bench near the back of the park, away from the playground, and I helped him out of the chair, and we sat together in the thin October sunlight. And for a long while neither of us said anything at all. Grandpa, he said finally, looking down at his sneakers instead of at me, are you mad at me? I felt something crack open in my chest all over again. The same crack from Dr. Okafor's office, except wider this time, because now it had a child's voice sitting inside it. No, buddy, I said. I could never be mad at you. Not for one single second. Do you understand that? He didn't answer right away. He picked at a loose thread on the hem of his jacket, the way children do when they are building up the courage to say something they have been carrying alone for far too long. I don't want to be sick anymore, he said so quietly I almost missed it. I never was. Dad said it was important. He said it was helping people. He said if I told the truth, bad things would happen. To him, to Mom, to me. I put my arm around my grandson and held him while he cried, the particular quiet crying of a child who has been carrying an adult's secret for so long that setting it down feels almost worse than carrying it did. And I told him, with everything I had left inside me, that none of this was his fault, not one single piece of it, and that whatever happened next, whatever bad things his father had threatened him with, I was not going to let a single one of them land on him. Grandpa, he said after a while, wiping his face with the back of his hand, I have to tell you something. I've been keeping something. I didn't know who to give it to. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, no bigger than his thumb attached to a keychain shaped like a soccer ball. It's from Mom's laptop, he said. She leaves it open sometimes when she does the videos, the ones where she films for me for the website. I copied some of the files onto this a few months ago. I don't really know why. I wanted somebody to know it wasn't real. in case something happened. I took that flash drive from my grandson's hand with a steadiness I did not entirely feel, and I told him he had just done one of the bravest things I had ever seen anyone do, and I meant every word of it. And I drove him home 15 minutes early, and I did not say a single word to Melissa or Marcus about what I now knew was sitting in my jacket pocket. That night, I plugged the drive into an old laptop that had never once connected to the internet, a habit left over from 31 years of handling exactly this kind of material, and I opened the first file. The video was 11 months old. It showed Caleb sitting on the edge of a bed, arranged to look like a hospital room, a saline bag hanging from a stand in the corner, that I was fairly certain had never been connected to anything. The lighting adjusted cool and harsh, in a way that made a healthy child look washed out and fragile. Melissa's voice came from behind the camera, warm, coaching, terrible, in a way I will never fully be able to describe to you. Okay, sweetheart, remember what we talked about. A little more tired this time. Can you do that for me? Caleb's small shoulders dropped on command. His chin lowered. He rearranged his face into an expression of practiced suffering with the mechanical precision of a child who has been taught this the way other children are taught to say please and thank you. Good, Melissa said, and her voice was warm with approval in a way that turned my stomach entirely over. Now, when I ask how you're feeling, what do you say? It hurts everywhere, Caleb said. Flat, rehearsed. A line memorized so many times it had stopped meaning anything at all. I stopped the video. I sat at my kitchen table with both hands pressed flat against the surface, and I gave myself exactly 1 full minute to feel the entire weight of what I had just watched, because I had learned a long time ago that a man who refuses to feel a thing before he acts on it usually ends up acting on it badly. Then I put it away in the compartment where it needed to go for the next 36 hours, and I opened the next file, and the next, 17 files in total, every one of them a small, careful rehearsal of a lie that had been sold, one glossy fundraising post at a time, to thousands of strangers who believed with their whole hearts that they were helping a dying child. By the time I closed that laptop, it was past 4 in the morning, and I understood exactly what I was going to need to bring into a courtroom that had not even been scheduled yet, and I understood exactly how little time I had left to make sure it was ready. Friday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of October morning that cannot decide whether it belongs to autumn or the winter just behind it. I had been up since 5, the old habit from 31 years of hours that never accommodated sleeping in, and I was on my second cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was my attorney, a careful, understated man named Everett Boone, who had handled my estate paperwork for a decade and had never once, before this month, handled anything close to what I was about to hand him. Walter, he said, I need you to understand what we're walking into. Priya Anand's office confirmed this morning that an emergency ex-parte hearing has been placed on Judge Renfro's calendar for 10 a.m. Petitioner is Marcus Cole on behalf of the family, requesting an emergency order restricting your contact with your grandson pending a formal fitness evaluation. The filing describes you as, and I'm reading directly, exhibiting signs of, quote, escalating paranoid behavior and unauthorized interference in the family's medical decisions, unquote. They're using the doctor's visit, I said, and probably something about the flash drive going missing from Melissa's laptop. If she's noticed by now. Both, Boone confirmed. It's a well-built filing, Walter. I want to be honest with you. If this were the only document in front of a judge this morning, I believe there's a real chance he signs it. It won't be the only document, I said. Trust me on that. I dressed carefully that morning. The dark gray suit I had worn to Eleanor's funeral. The only suit I owned that felt like it understood the weight of what I was about to walk into. I put her pocket watch in my breast pocket, out of habit, out of something more than habit. If I am being fully honest with you, and I put a sealed red envelope in my jacket, the one Priya Anand's office had couriered to my house at 7 that morning, containing the formal notification that the parallel investigation into the Caleb Hensley Cole Foundation and into Judge Harold Renfro's conduct regarding it had reached a stage the Attorney General's office was prepared to make part of the public record, effective immediately, upon my request. I want to tell you something about walking into that courthouse. I had walked into courthouses for 31 years as an investigator, as an advisor, as a man whose job it was to sit quietly in the back of a room and understand exactly how power moved through it. I had never once walked in as the person whose fate the room was about to decide. It is a different kind of walking. Your legs know the building, your heart does not. Marcus and Melissa were already seated at the petitioner's table when I came in, flanked by two attorneys from a downtown firm I recognized by reputation alone. The kind of firm that dresses its clients for television appearances as much as for courtrooms. Marcus wore a navy suit and an expression of composed, rested confidence, the look of a man who believes the outcome of the morning has already been decided somewhere above his pay grade, and today is simply the formality of collecting it. Melissa sat beside him with her hands folded, her eyes cast down in an expression of careful, performed distress, and when she glanced up and saw me, something crossed her face that was not quite guilt and not quite defiance, and lived somewhere uncomfortable between the two. Judge Harold Renfro entered at 9:58, 2 minutes early, which told me something all by itself about a man eager to move quickly through whatever was on his docket that morning. He reviewed the filing with the brisk efficiencies of someone who had, I suspected, already read it the night before. Marcus's lead attorney rose and delivered a presentation that was smooth, well rehearsed, and built entirely out of true details arranged to tell a false story. The unauthorized medical visit, the missing flash drive, a grandfather's grief over his late wife curdled, the attorney suggested delicately, into something unstable and dangerous. It was, I admit, listening to it, a genuinely skillful piece of work. Judge Renfro reached for his pen. "Your Honor," I said, rising, my voice coming out exactly as level as 31 years of training had taught it to come out. "Before you sign that order, I request 2 minutes to enter something into the record." Renfro's pen paused above the page. He looked at me the way a man looks at an obstacle he had not accounted for. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Hensley." "It is," I agreed. "It's also required, given what's in this envelope." I stepped forward and placed the sealed red envelope on the table in front of the bench. The room went quiet the particular way a room goes quiet when something walks in that nobody quite understands yet. "Your Honor," I said, "that envelope contains formal notification that the State Attorney General's Charitable Trusts Division, in coordination with the Judicial Conduct Commission, has an active, ongoing investigation into the Caleb Hensley Cole Foundation for suspected charitable fraud exceeding $400,000 and into the conduct of this court regarding today's expedited scheduling. I am formally entering that notification into the record of this proceeding." Marcus's attorney was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a transparent delay tactic. Mr. Hensley has no standing to." "It requires no standing to notify the court of an active state investigation, Counselor," I said, turning to look at him directly for the first time. "It only requires that the court be informed. I am informing it now." Judge Renfro's face had gone the particular gray color of a man doing rapid, unhappy arithmetic behind his eyes. He set his pen down without signing anything. And that was when the side door opened, not the main entrance behind the gallery, but the private door set into the wall beside the bench, the one that almost never opens during an active hearing, and Deputy Director Priyanand walked through it, carrying a single dark folder, moving through that courtroom like a woman who had every right in the world to be standing exactly where she was standing. "Your Honor," Priyanand said, "I apologize for the interruption. I'll be brief. My name is Priyanand, Deputy Director of the Charitable Trusts and Solicitations Division. I'm here because Walter Hensley contacted my office approximately 4 weeks ago regarding a matter that intersects directly with the proceeding in front of you this morning." Marcus's chair scraped back. "Your Honor, this is completely improper. We received no notice." "You'll have your opportunity to respond, Counselor," Anand said, and there was nothing raised in her voice at all, only a flat, immovable certainty that ended the sentence more effectively than shouting ever could have. She set the dark folder on the bench, squared it precisely with the edge of the wood, and continued. That investigation is now at a stage where I am formally requesting the court review its findings before taking any further action in this proceeding. I would also note for the record that Mr. Hensley served for 31 years as a federal investigator specializing in charitable fraud, and that his conduct throughout this matter has been fully documented and cooperative with this office from the very first phone call. Judge Renfro opened the folder with the particular deliberate slowness of a man who already suspected it was going to ruin his morning and was delaying the moment by whatever seconds he could steal. The first pages were Dr. Okafor's medical assessment. The next section was the financial discrepancy report from Otis Bramwell's records, laid out in the plain, damning language of numbers that do not match. Then came the section describing the flash drive, its chain of custody, its authentication, 17 video files, each one a documented rehearsal of a lie sold to the public. $23,000 raised in the name of a specific fundraising drive, Anand said quietly, for a boy named Jonah Pruitt, whose family's account was also linked to this foundation's donor materials. Jonah Pruitt passed away 11 months ago, Your Honor. The foundation continued soliciting donations under his photograph for 7 months after his death. The gallery made a sound, not loud but unmistakable, the sound of a room absorbing something it could not unhear. Melissa's composure broke first. She made a small, involuntary noise behind her hand, her eyes bright and glassy, with the specific terror of watching an entire structure of your life come apart in front of strangers. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the folder on the bench, his jaw working, his hand pressed flat against the table as though he could hold the morning still by sheer physical pressure alone. Judge Renfro closed the folder. His face had gone from gray to something closer to ash. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice tight and careful in a way it had not been 10 minutes earlier, "are the signatures on this foundation's incorporation documents your signatures?" The silence that followed lasted long enough that I counted it, out of habit, the way I had counted difficult silences for 31 years. Then Marcus said, "Yes," in a voice stripped down to a single flat syllable, and I watched my son-in-law understand in real time that the confident, capable man who had walked into that courtroom 20 minutes earlier no longer existed. "This hearing is suspended," Judge Renfro said. "This matter is referred to the Attorney General's office for full investigation, including the conduct of this court in scheduling today's proceeding." He would not meet Priya Anand's eyes as he said it, and 2 weeks later, I would learn that the Judicial Conduct Commission had opened its own formal inquiry into exactly how quickly Harold Renfro had agreed to hear an emergency filing from a man he had once done business favors for in another life. 2 court officers approached Melissa's side of the table. I watched my daughter's face collapse into something raw and real, the first honest expression I had seen on it in 14 months, and some small, aching part of me wanted to cross the room and hold her the way I had held her through every hard thing in her childhood, because underneath everything she had done, she was still my daughter. And I understood, watching her, that grief for what someone has become does not cancel out love for who they used to be. It simply learns to carry both at once. Marcus turned and looked at me before they led him out, and there was nothing left in his eyes of the man who had once shaken my hand at his wedding and promised me he'd take care of my daughter and, eventually, my grandson. I looked back at him and did not look away first, and I found, to my own surprise, that I felt no triumph at all, only a deep, tired grief, and underneath it, something close to relief, because Friday had come and I had not disappeared, and the person it had actually arrived for was finally standing where he belonged. The weeks that followed brought the consequences the way consequences always arrive, not all at once, but one by one, each one clicking into place like a lock finally turning. Marcus was charged with charitable fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, covering not just Caleb but 4 other children whose names investigators uncovered in the Foundation's records over the following month. His law license was suspended within days. Melissa cooperated with investigators and, largely on the strength of that cooperation, and the fact that Caleb's welfare was never in question, once the truth came out, avoided the harshest of the charges, though she will spend a long time in supervised probation and mandated counseling, rebuilding whatever she is able to rebuild. I was granted emergency guardianship of Caleb within 9 days, pending a full custody review that, 6 months later, would make that arrangement permanent, with supervised visitation for Melissa built carefully into it, because whatever else was true, Caleb still loved his mother. And I was not in the business of taking that from him, too. The first morning Caleb woke up in my house, he came downstairs in his socks and slid halfway across the kitchen floor, just because he could, and asked if I'd make the eggs the way Grandma used to, with too much pepper, and I stood at that stove with tears in my eyes that I did not bother hiding from him, because some things a boy deserves to see him cry over. He plays soccer now, real soccer, on a real field, with a coach who has no idea he was ever supposed to be sick a day in his life. Some evenings, after his homework, he sits with me on the back porch, and we don't talk about any of it, and some evenings he does want to talk, and I let him lead exactly as far as he wants to go, and not one step further. People ask me sometimes whether I regret waiting as long as I did before I acted, whether I wish I had confronted Marcus the very afternoon I saw Caleb standing on that patio. My answer is always the same. If I had moved that day, out of anger instead of evidence, I would have lost. They would have painted me exactly as they tried to paint me anyway. An old man unraveling, dangerous to be around his own grandson, and there would have been no red envelope, no folder, no 31 years of quiet preparation standing behind me when it mattered most. Being right is not enough in this world. You have to be right and ready at the same time. So here is what I want to leave you with if you've stayed this long. If something feels wrong about a child in your life, a grandchild, a neighbor's kid, anyone, do not wait for certainty before you start paying attention. Certainty is a luxury. Children do not have the years to wait for you to feel comfortable. Notice quietly, build carefully, and when the moment finally comes to walk through that courtroom door, walk through it steady, because the truth, once it's fully assembled, does not need you to raise your voice. It only needs you to show up. They thought I'd be gone by Friday. Friday morning, I was the only one still standing.